Hello everyone, I'm Apollo from the Dyspraxia System, and today I want to talk about self-stigma or internalized stigma. It's both different wording for the same thing. It will be mainly focused on self-stigma around mental illnesses or illnesses in general, but you can have self-stigma about anything, about being LGBT, about having a different skin color, about being a woman. It's anything. I mean, internalized misogyny, specifically for if you're a woman. You've internalized homophobia, internalized transphobia, probably internalized racism as well. That's just more specific terms, but in the end it's all self-stigma or internalized stigma. I have a website about self-stigma, types of self-stigma, and what you can do to lessen it. So I'm gonna use that. It will be linked down in the description as well, in case you want to read it. But yeah. So self-stigma is, generally speaking, just stigma around something that you have, but you've internalized it. So the stigma you hear around you, like, oh, being gay is bad, if people with borderline are always manipulative, stuff like that, you just internalize, so you either consciously or subconsciously believe that about yourself or about other people who have the same thing as you. There are 4 different types of self-stigma listed on this site. First one is alienation. So this is feeling embarrassed, ashamed, inferior, or disappointed in yourself for being ill, feeling that your illness is your fault, believing mental illness has ruined your life, feeling like others are incapable of understanding you. So this is just, you hide that part of yourself completely from everyone because you're ashamed of it. If you have something like borderline, DID, OSD, something that you can get later on in your life that you're not born with, you can believe that you caused it for yourself. It's just feeling like no one can relate to you, so it's better to just keep it all inside, and because of that you end up alienating yourself. That's probably what it's called, alienation. And then the second one is stereotype endorsement. This is applying stereotypes to yourself, such as people with mental illness are violent, can't live good or rewarding lives, can't do certain typical things, for example, get married, work a steady job, contribute to society, and can't make decisions for themselves. So this is what I mentioned earlier. If you hear a lot of people say, oh, people with borderline are all manipulative, for example, and then you start thinking that for yourself, even though you have borderline, that is another example of stereotype endorsement. You just hear all those stereotypes and you start applying them to yourself and also to other people with your mental illness. Then the third one is discrimination experience. This is feeling discriminated against, patronized, ignored, or not taken seriously, believing others would not want a relationship with you, feeling capable of achieving much. So this is really just, it's it's a little bit like stereotype endorsement, but it's more broader, and it's just you feel like you can't do much. There are not many opportunities for you because you have this mental illness, even though that's most likely not at all the case. And then the last one is social withdrawal. So avoiding getting close to people who don't have mental illness, socializing or talking about yourself because you feel like a burden, out of place or inadequate, like a potential embarrassment to loved ones. Didn't know that was self-stigma. We definitely struggle with that last one. Well, we probably struggle with all of them, but definitely the last one. So yeah, this is just feeling like, oh, no one can love me because I have this thing, so it's best to just not let them get close to me, because they'll just leave me anyway, or just feeling out of place because you have this disorder. We kind of have that at our study. We feel out of place because we're disabled, even though we're supposed to learn about how to help people that are disabled. There's also just a lot of stigma in our study. That's also one of the reasons why we talk about this today. But we won't get too much into that. But yeah, what can be the consequence of self-stigma? There are a wide range of consequences of self-stigma. It can be a barrier to recovery, increased depression, reduced self-esteem, reduced recovery orientation, reduced empowerment, and increased perceived devaluation and discrimination, among other consequences. A study also showed a strong correlation between loneliness and self-stigma, which makes sense if you feel like a burden to people, if you feel out of place, if you start alienating yourself, you won't feel the connection to other people that you need in order not to feel lonely. Yeah. It's definitely stuff that we can see relate to our life. But yeah, they have 3 things listed here more in detail. One of them is self-sabotage. Many people with mental illness engage in self-sabotaging behavior because self-stigma causes them to expect failure. So you start acting in a way, most likely unconsciously, well, at least a little bit unconsciously. You might not realize that that's what you're doing till after you've done it. But it's just doing something in a certain way, expecting failure, so don't put as much effort into it as you could. So you end up failing anyway because you are expecting to fail. The example they give here is to refuse or stop taking medication because we don't believe it will work or that we will get better. It can be emotionally easier to handle intentional failure than trying to succeed and fail. Yeah. So then you would be doing it on purpose, but you can also self-sabotage unconsciously, not on purpose. Just of how internalized it is. Intentionally causing harm or cutting off relationships because you expect them to fail. That is something that you hear a lot of people say with borderline. It's like it's better to leave people before they can leave you because that way you won't get abandoned, even though in the end it's the same thing. The relationship still ends, just you that chose to end it. And most likely out of fear, which is not a good thing. Self-stigma may cause us to question the viability of the relationship, because who could possibly like us? A lot of people can like you. Self-sabotaging is most often a way to protect yourself. Just it's the wrong way of protecting yourself. Then the next one they list is rumination. So there's many people living with mental illness struggle with rumination on negative thoughts. Also, we may generalize our experiences of stigma. If we've experienced stigma a few times, we may assume that others who do not stigmatize also have stigmatizing views about us. So it's like, oh, this is what some people think about us, so this is what everyone must think about us. Just because a few people think about you in a stigmatizing way doesn't mean by a long shot that everyone does. The last one is suicidal ideation. I don't think I really need to go in on that. Also, just because I know that can be a very common trigger to people. So if you want to read what they list about suicidal ideation, you can check out the link. But it's just a bit of an example of what it is. Then they go into addressing self-stigma. So there are many ways to address self-stigma. A study found 2 leading approaches to self-stigma reductions were attempts to 1. Alter stigmatizing beliefs and attitudes of the individual, and 2. Enhance skills for coping with self-esteem through improvements in self-esteem, empowerment, and help-seeking behavior. These approaches can be addressed in a clinical setting, but self-stigma is often best addressed through supportive interactions with loved ones. So it's best to do it with friends and family than with therapists. For example, that's what they're saying here. Statements and actions from people who care about us usually have a larger impact on us. That makes sense. You value an opinion of a friend or a family member more than of some psychiatrist or therapist. At least when it's about you in this kind of way. Obviously, you should also still listen to your therapist or psychiatrist, but yeah. They also give a few tips for loved ones to guide a conversation as they try to help address self-stigma. The first one is to try to understand. So do not underestimate the power of self-stigma. Try to identify and understand its potential consequences. Assume that your loved one is experiencing self-stigma given its prevalence and the detrimental impacts. Many of us are reluctant to talk about stigma, let alone self-stigma. We don't want to admit that stigma impacts us as much as it does. You rather say that you're better off mentally than you are, whether that be about self-stigma or anything. It's easier to pretend that you're fine than it is to admit that something's actually troubling you. Obviously the same goes for admitting that you do have self-stigma. Also consider if you may have made stigmatizing comments, even if unintentionally, to your loved one. Be prepared to recognize and apologize for this behavior. Yeah, so it's really just try to understand your loved one's point of view. Try to think if you said anything stigmatizing on accident towards them, and if you did, apologize and try to help them through it. Then the next thing they list is use facts. So assemble facts and resources to prove that common stigma examples are false. For example, contrary to popular stigmatizing views, people with mental illnesses are more likely to be victims of crime than perpetrators. Self-stigma based on stigma that can be objectively disproven is easier to address than subjective sources of stigma. Obviously, if there are hard facts to disprove your beliefs, it's easier to change them than it is if it's all subjective. Talk about common examples of stigma and self-stigma to show your familiarity and recognize that your loved one may be experiencing them. You may also note common emotional reactions triggered by stigma, namely sadness and anger. So it's really just, explain that you understand this stigma, talk about how stigma is not true. If possible, use facts to show that they're not true. Then the next thing is respond thoughtfully. So be aware that talking about self-stigma is often more about how it makes your loved one feel rather than whether it's reasonable for them to believe the stereotype to be true. Be extremely cautious about delegitimizing, diminishing, or dismissing emotions by saying statements like, you shouldn't feel that way, or why do you feel that way? That sort of statement may provoke an emotional defensive response. Yeah. So one thing that's very important to remember with this one is that no matter what you're feeling, your feelings are always true. It might not seem logical to someone that you're responding that way emotionally, but your emotions are always true. That is something our social worker said to us recently. That is very important to remember for us and also for other people. So yeah, if you feel like your loved one is responding in a way that doesn't seem appropriate or that you don't understand, do validate them, like, oh, I see you're feeling that way. How can I help, or how can I lessen that you feel this way, or explain, like if they get angry about something, explain in a good way why it is not something that they should get that angry about, while not saying that just straight up wrong to get angry about it. Just be like, oh yeah, I see it makes you angry, but if you look at it from this perspective, you can see that they didn't mean it that way, for example. So I don't think you necessarily have to get this angry about it. Just be careful when you respond that you don't accidentally invalidate their feelings. Because I know for myself that if someone makes me feel like my emotions are wrong, I just close off completely and will think in my head that I should no longer talk about that specific topic with this specific person because they're not gonna understand me anyway, they're not gonna respond the way I want them to anyway. They're just gonna invalidate me and make me feel wrong and bad, so I should just not say another word. Sometimes we literally go almost mute, depending on how impactful this specific topic was, and how strongly we feel about it. But yeah, telling someone that their emotions are wrong will make them go on a defensive emotionally. And that's not something you want if you're discussing something as delicate as this. And then the last thing they say is, keep in mind self-stigma can persist despite recovery. Maybe it's because we know that there's always the risk of a mental illness relapse. This possibility may leave open in our minds the fear that stigma was right all along if we relapse. So how do I cope with the shadow of self-stigma? I know that just as relapse is possible, so is recovery. I take comfort knowing that I have recovered before and I can do it again, should I relapse. And having recovered before, I have the tools and the roadmap now to get me to recovery more easily. Recovery is the ultimate way to prove stigma wrong. And it is. We saw a Dutch video from a university professor. Don't remember exactly which university professor. For people who are Dutch, I can also link that in the description. If I find the video again, I know where to find it. That also talks about self-stigma in like a broader sense. And there, they also said that a way to beat your self-stigma or go against self-stigma is to take pride in the thing that you have self-stigma about. So if you are ashamed of your system, for example, of having alters, you should try to take pride in the fact that your system. You can take pride in it in many ways. Just being open about your experiences is already a way to take pride in it. But the more open you are about it, the more pride you get in it. And taking pride in something doesn't mean that you like it. It just means that you've accepted it in some way. But yeah, the more pride you take in it, then lesser certain self-stigma will be. You'll be less ashamed of it. Generally speaking, it will help with that. Or it might help you find other people like you, so then it also helps go against, alienating you from other people because they're not like you. Obviously it's not the end-all solution. Just take pride and all stigma will be gone. That's not how it works, sadly, but it does very much help. So if you see people say, oh, but they take too much pride in their disorder, that's not being scientific. No, because the professor literally said, and he probably has sources for it, that taking pride in something helps lessen your self-stigma, so it's actually a very good thing. So yeah, taking part in being gay, for example, is a common way that we, as society, know in lessening self-stigma around being gay and to help you beat the stigma from society around you. So the same goes for having a mental illness. Just try to take some pride in it. But yeah, I'll list the website to this, the link to this website in the comments along with that Dutch video. I don't think they have English subtitles, but I'm not entirely sure. Probably YouTube auto-generated subtitles because those are always there. But I don't know if they have actual English subtitles, and I'm pretty sure the video was in Dutch. But I'll list that down in the description as well. I hope that this was informational. And just because people have a lot of self-stigma, that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of stigma out there as well. A lot of the time, self-stigma is just a reaction to stigma we encounter in society. So yeah, that's also an important thing to note. Stigma is not just all in your head, but a large part of it can be in your head. But I think the majority is definitely stigma from society as a whole. But I don't have any resources for that claim. It's just something I believe. Yeah. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or whatever, leave them down below in the comments. If you want to follow us on social media, you can. It's in the description as well. I would recommend following us on Twitter. We kind of stopped using our Instagram account altogether. I just don't know what to post on there. So yeah. And if you want to see more of our videos, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified when we upload a new video. We upload every Wednesday. And we'll see y'all in the next video. Bye!